Hi everyone. In this video we are going to talk about the box model concept, and I'm going to start out with just a basic web page continuing from the previous lesson. So if you don't already have a file with a basic web page, just go ahead and pause the video. You can see here, let me go ahead and actually make this a little bit larger. And you can see here what code you need. So hopefully you already know this by now. If not, just go ahead and copy that down. We're going to start from here. So this video also goes along with the tutorial that you'll find in the link on the itinerary on D2L, titled The Box Model with Height, Padding, Border, and Margin. All right, so the box model concept basically is that in an HTML document, every element is a box. And when you just add in the elements, they're invisible, but you can apply width, height, padding, border, and margin. Some of these are already applied by browser defaults, not all of them, and not the same way in each browser. So if you definitely know you want something to be a specific way, then you might want to go ahead and declare them. Once you start to get a handle or a hang of what browser defaults actually are, sometimes it's a better idea to just leave a browser default as it is if that's the styling that you want anyway. But if it's not, you want to definitely declare it. So in that tutorial, you saw that the center of the box is our content. So if you don't add any of the box model properties, you just have your content. And depending on what element that content is in, whether it's a block level element or an inline element, the browser defaults for the width and height will be dependent on that type of element. If it's a block level element, it will get its width from its parent. It will default to 100% of its parent. And a block level element will get its height from its content. So it gets its width from its parent and its height from its content. An inline element, however, gets both its width and its height from its content. So it's kind of shrink wrapped right around that content until you override those browser defaults. So there are some things that you can't do to an inline element. However, you could always just change the display of that element. So in the itinerary, you'll also see a link that talks about the display property and how you can change that. So you could actually change how a block level element has its width and height applied and things like that, how inline elements have width and height applied, and whether or not they stay in line. And if we want to override those browser defaults, we first start with the width and height. We give our element dimension. So if I say that later in other lessons, give your element dimension, that's what I mean. Give it a width and a height. So after that width and height is applied, you then have padding that you can add in between that content and the edge of the element. So most of the time you don't see the edge of the element. You just have to remember what we just talked about with the width and height as applied by browser default to block level and inline elements. So whatever the edge of that element is, if you want to add space between the edge of that element and the content inside that element, then you can add padding. So biggest thing to remember with padding is that it's inside the element. To see the edge of the element, you can add a border. So border is still part of the box model. Or you could add a background color or a background image or anything to the background that you then would also see the edge of the element. That is not part of the box model. So that will be discussed also in another lesson in the itinerary. If you do add a border, however, you will see the edge of that element. After the edge of the element, that is when you have margin. So the margin's not actually part of the element, whereas border, padding, and the width and height are. The margin is outside of the element. You're basically saying, this is how much space I want to have around this element before you allow another element. So you can think of it as the space between elements. So either around an element or the space between elements. Let's take a look at each one of those in greater detail.